beginning this new year, I started to do a series on the new year and the new you. I believe in this year 2020, God is going to do a beautiful new thing in this church, in your life of your family. So the new beginnings, the new year, and it's a new you. And so we started off this series. And last 2 weeks ago when I preached on Joseph, and where Joseph came to many places where it kind of road got closed for him, and wondered whether God is going to do something. God begins to open up and do something in his life. And last week we saw was Moses, and I called Moses the goat, the greatest of all time. Is that right? He was the greatest of all time prophet. He was. So we kind of traced Moses and Moses' life, and we came to that place where Moses was right in front of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army was following. And Moses probably thought to himself, God, is this it? Is that right? Even for the people of Israel, as they stood there, that's their complaint to Moses. Why did you bring us out? Did we have graves in Israel? Why did you bring us out? In Egypt, did we have any graves in Egypt? Why did you bring us out? To just let us die in the Red Sea? And so, but then Moses delivers them. So every time there was a roadblock, God begins to do something new in the life. And I told the folks in the first service, I said, Moses didn't get to enter the promised land. Is that right? And some scholars say, and even the scripture says, probably he was not allowed because God asked him to speak to the rock. Instead of that, he hit the rock. And so God was very upset with them. God was very upset with Moses, and so he did not let him enter the promised land. And sometimes when I read those things, I have a hard time with those things. Because if God had to do something like that to Moses, how much more in our own willful disobedience that we have? Is that right? There are so many ways God will stop us from receiving God's blessing. I don't think that's the way we need to look at Scripture. Because when I read that story, Moses was picked for a particular purpose. And the purpose was fulfilled. Is that right? Moses' purpose was fulfilled. God's grand design, Moses was not the one who will take the people into the promised land. It was Joshua. So God, again, God's grand design in your life will be fulfilled wherever you are. Sometimes the roadblocks are good places to stop and think where God is taking us, but God will fulfill those plans. And so God used Moses for a particular purpose. God did that. He would have said, Moses, I think your time is over. Let's move on. So we ended with Moses. Is that right? And I wanted to continue this one. And if you come to the book of Judges, by this time the people have entered into the promised land. They are all in the promised land. And they are very comfortable about their lives. They are in the promised land, and there are many tribes around the people of Israel. And each one of them are very jealous about the people of Israel, and they keep kind of in war with them. If you read the book of Judges, there are many small prophets that God will raise. In your computer lingos, it's called short-term project leads. God picks one, uses them, then it's over, put it away. God uses Huldah, God uses Deborah, God uses Gideon. God uses all of those people for a short-term project. That's it. They never ask God, is there anything more? No. Your project is over, you can go home. Is that right? So God used all of that. But when you read the book of Judges, there's one thing that's totally disturbing from the beginning to the end. You know what it says? Very simply, it says, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's what it says. They did things that are what was right in their own eyes. And sometimes when I read those portions like that, we live in the times of Judges, isn't it? We also live and we say, God, I do this because it felt right for me. Am I making sense? We live in a time, isn't it? We live in a time where we say, God, this looks fine, this looks right in my own eyes. But whether it's right in your eyes is not, it's completely different. But it looked right for me. So we live in the time of Judges, isn't it? So today morning I want to look into one judge, and I will quickly do my points and I will finish. But you're going to help me out. And you can open your Bible. There are a few Bibles. You can open your Bibles. I don't know the page numbers, but I'll tell you what it is. From 13 to chapter 16 is where we find the story of Samson. And now if you want to know a little bit of a background of Samson, Manoah is what is mentioned, but his wife's name is never mentioned. You might wonder why, I don't know. Manoah's name is mentioned, but his wife, his name is not mentioned again. And God through an angel comes to meet Manoah's wife and looks at her and she says, "You've been barren, God's going to give you a son." And so she says, okay. She's not able to believe. She says she wants her husband to hear. And so she asks the angel, "Will you come back again?" The angel says, okay. The angel says, "We'll come back again." So the angel comes back again. This time, again, God meets both Manoah and his wife. And God says, "Hey, listen, you're going to have a son. And the son will be great, will be strong. But you have to have him a Nazarite vow." Is that right? That he will grow there, he will be strong, and he will deliver his people from the hands of the Philistines. That's where we start. In chapter 14, if you know how the books work, Genesis, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and then Judges. Okay, let's do chapter 14. If you have your Bible, there's only one verse. Chapter 14, verse 6. If you have it, just read it for me.
The Spirit of the Lord rushed on him, and he tore the lion apart, barehanded, as one might tear apart a kid.
Okay.
But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done.
Okay, this is what it says. It says, Samson went to this place called Timnah, and he found this beautiful woman, and he wanted to get married. And his father and mother said, "No, Samson, don't do this. Couldn't you find somebody from our own clan?" He says, "No, Dad, this is who I want. This is it." Is that right? And so as they are going, he sees this lion, and when he sees this lion, he doesn't run scared back. He stops there in front of the lion, looks at it, and you know what it says? This is the word that I want you to hold on. You know what it says? It says, "And the Spirit of the Lord rushed into Samson." Samson didn't ask for it. I'm making sense. Because this is what I want you to hang on to. Samson never asked for it. Samson never stood there and said, "God, give me strength." No. That's not what he asked. Samson stood there, he saw the lion, did not run away, and it says, "And the Spirit of the Lord rushed into Samson." It was not like he was waiting for it. Rushed into Samson. That's your number one. And he tore the lion apart, it says. My next reference, chapter 14, verse 19. You can, if you're a young person here, and Becca, you can pick the Bible, you can read Judges, you can read that for me. Come on, I'm going to call names. This is what I do, I get paid for doing that. Chapter 14, verse 19. Becca, read that for me.
Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed on him, and he went down to
Ashkelon.
He killed 30 men of the town, took their spoil, and gave the festal garments to those who had explained the riddle.
Beautiful. This is what happens. He goes, remember I told you, he looks at this woman in Timnah, he wants to get married, but in the meantime there is all this confusion. He puts a riddle to the people, and they say, if you solve this riddle, everything will be fine. They are not able to solve the riddle. They finally convince this woman to coax Samson so that he could release the answer for that riddle. Is it right? And 30 people came that day. You know what it says? The same word. What does it say? And the Spirit of the Lord rushed into Samson. Look at the third reference, chapter 15, verse 14.
When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him, and the Spirit of the Lord rushed on him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands.
Yeah. By this time, the people of Judah coming and telling Samson, "Hey Samson, listen, you become strong, you become a notorious guy. So what you do is, hey, listen, these guys of Judah and Israel are giving us the Philistines are giving us a hard time. Why don't you just submit to yourself?" And so he asked them, "So if I submit themselves, will they not kill me?" No, I promise you, they won't kill you. And so they say, "Okay, then bind me." And he says, they bound him with fresh ropes. If it's an older one, if it's an old rope, they could have just put fresh ropes on him. And you know what it says? 3,000 people came that day to capture Samson. What does it say? And the Spirit of the Lord rushed into Samson. 3,000 people, folks. And later on in the same chapter, he is so thirsty that he looks to God and he says, "God, I am so thirsty." And you know what he says? And the Spirit of the Lord broke open a rock and gives water to Samson. The reason why I say that is, Samson never asked for it. Because God had picked him for a purpose, the Spirit of the Lord rushed into him. And as the Spirit of the Lord rushed into him, every time he rushed into him, he did amazing things, isn't it? And he thought he was the most invincible guy. Making sense? If you read stories of people, you go and Google and you find stories of people who in the peak of their careers, when everything was going right in their life, and when they thought that was invincible for them, right? So many. Look in the banking industry. Look anywhere. Look in the music industry. Look in the cine, whatever it is, Hollywood, Bollywood, wherever it is. In the most prime time of their life, if somebody had come and told them, hey, this is going to happen to your life, they'd say, no. Invincible. That's exactly what Samson thought. What Samson thought was he was invincible, isn't it? He never thought anything can happen until something begins to happen. There are three things, in my opinion, that happens when you are in that state of invincibility. Number one, I always found this very interesting. When they are in that place, they always think that they are beyond mistakes. If you tell them, hey, what you're doing will not work, say no. Because the power and the courage and whatever they have in their hands, they think that nothing can happen. They think that they are beyond mistakes. Number two, they think that they are beyond temptation. Yeah. Samson thought he was beyond temptation, isn't it? Ask these guys who are in the top of their careers. Ask Weinstein. Is it right? Do you think of any person in the peak of their careers, when you tell them hey, listen, they think they're beyond temptation. Number three, this is the hard part. When you tell them, hey, listen, this won't work, they think they are beyond correction. Are you with me? You can nod sometimes to a preacher. Because you're awake, you're listening to me. Yeah, they think they are beyond mistakes, they are beyond temptation, and they are beyond corruption. That's exactly what Samson thought to himself. Until one day, things begin to change. By this time, he has already ruled 20 years. Prime time of his life, folks. Ruled 20 years. Is that right? Then he falls in love with this woman named Delilah. But before that, I'm just going to open your Bibles and keep it open with chapter 16. And I'm going to read the first verse, but then I'm going to follow it later on. You know what it says? And he went into Gaza, it says. He was not supposed to go to Gaza. He was supposed to stay where he was. You know what happens is people who become invincible in their lives, at least who think they are invincible in their lives, begin to take things into their own hands. Are you with me? They really begin to take things into their own hands. God must have told Samson, don't do that. But Samson said, God, you're probably a mistake. You picked me for a purpose, is it right? And he told himself, God, I'm taking this into my own hands. And he goes into this place. God did not want him to go. He meets his woman Delilah. And you know the rest of the story, is that right? He meets his woman Delilah. And all the Philistines wanted to tell Delilah, find out what is the secret of this man's power and strength. She puts him one riddle after the other. One time, tell us what, and he says this one, this one. And you know what it says? In one place, he was so tired to death with her nagging. That's what it says. He was so tired to death of her nagging, and he gives into Delilah's request. This is what I want you to read, and I'll just make a couple of points and I'll close. This is chapter 16, verse 18. I'm going to read it with you. When Delilah realized, she felt assured. This is the time he had given up the secret. It says that he had told her his whole secret. She sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, this time come up, for he has told his whole secret to me. Then the lords of the Philistines came to her and brought the money in her hands, and she let him fall asleep on her lap. We have this standing joke in our home. You can verify it when you go down with my wife. things can just break down and burn, my wife can sleep through it. I'm being very serious because for me, every small noise in the house will wake me up, but not so with my wife. That's the kind of a sleep that Samson was in. Just imagine, folks, he was sleeping and somebody was shaving his hair and he did not know it. Call this God? I don't know. Call this an enemy? I don't know. But that's how fast asleep he was. And that's what it says. She let him sleep on her lap, and she called a man and had him shave the 7 locks of his head. And then it says, he began to weaken and his strength left him. Then she said to the Philistines, are upon you, Samson. When he woke up from his sleep, he thought, it says, no, he didn't think. He assumed. Because every other time, when the Philistines came and when she did the same thing, is that right? When she told Samson, they are coming at you. Immediately he woke up because the Lord's strength was there, right? Is that right? He thought, no, he didn't think, he assumed. Is that right? That's what it says. He thought that it was, and I would go out as other times and shake myself free. He thought he just do the same thing over again. But look at the next line. This is the line that I want you to hang on to when you leave this place. You know what it says? Look at the next one. It says, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. God picked Saul as the king of Israel, is that right? Mighty warrior he was. But at one point, Saul gets defeated and Saul does not know what it happens, right? And you know what the scripture says? And the Spirit of the Lord had left him and Saul did not know. Folks, in your time and my time of invincibility, sometimes God's power goes out of us and we don't know that God has left us. Don't be in that place. Always be assured of God's strength and power in your life. Am I making sense? Is that right? And look at further down, it says, I will go out as other times and shake myself, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. So the Philistines seized him, and you know what? Look at the next line, and it says, and gouged his eyes. And I was telling myself, why didn't they cut his hands? Is that right? Why didn't they cut his feet? Why the eyes? Is that right? Like one scholar so beautifully said, Samson's biggest problem was not anything else except his eyes. Eyes was Samson's biggest problem. You know why? Because every time he went and saw something, he wanted it. When he went into this place and he saw this beautiful woman and he told this is the one that I want to get married. The problem with Samson is his eye. And what it says? They gouged his eyes. And I looked at myself and said, and I asked God, how can they do this to Samson? And you know what? The scholar so beautifully says, sometimes God does the most hardest things in our lives if he wants to redeem you and me. God is not interested in taking the small sins of your life. Yeah, God, I'll stop lying. If God's redemption has to be complete in your life and in my life, God will do the most hardest things. For Samson, gouging where the eyes was the beginning of his redemption. Isn't it? Look further down. And he says, know what it says? And then he says, they brought him to the Gaza and they bound him with bronze shackles and he ground as the mill in the prison. This is the good news, folks. You know what it says? But the hair of his head began to grow again. The hair on his head began to grow again. A guy who was writing on this one, he says 1/8, this is what he writes. He says 1/8 of an inch grows on you every week. And the 6 inches of hair grows on you probably in a month. And he says, if you want the hair to grow like Samson's as long as to his ways. It would have taken him probably 6 years. The reason why I said that is God's redemption in your life and in my life begins to happen, and sometimes it takes a little longer. It won't happen so quickly, but it will happen. For Samson, it took a long time, but it did happen, isn't it? It happens. It happened for Samson. It will happen for you. So you know the rest of the story. I know you're just getting a little distracted. I know you know the rest of the story. He goes to this place where 3,000 people that day were seated in that place. And Samson asks God, he just prays a simple prayer. He says, remember me, O God. Strengthen me, O God. And even in that place, is it right? If you look at that, the number of me that he uses and the number of I that he uses, even in his moment of trouble, isn't it? He still is all about himself. Folks, sometimes in our I prayers, God will never say, oh, you're only praying for yourself. God rushes to help you and to help me. In our morning worship, when Katie led worship, she read the text where God breathes God's breath into the life, into the man who he made out of dust. Man and woman fall. God doesn't wait, is it? It says in the scripture, and God came to Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening. God did not let Samson be in that place, isn't it? God comes to Samson. God will never let you and me wallow in our weakness, in our pain, in our grief, in our doubt. All name it. God will not wait because you have willfully disobeyed God. God will come to you in the midst of your willful disobedience as well. We went to Rensselaer Polytechnic. That's where my son is doing his college. And we went into this place, and there was this room called the Alumni Hall. And when you stood in that place, there were these pictures all over the wall. And what they call it as the Hall of Faith for them, all of these achievers. If you go and look at that, all of these guys, the guys who built the Brooklyn Bridge, the guy who did this invention, that invention. And when you look at that, and I stood there looking at them, and I said, man, these guys are amazing guys. These guys must have been brilliant. These guys would not have failed. But God was reminding me, they did fail. You know, when you look at chapter 11 of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews paints a beautiful picture of the hall of faith, isn't it? Of all the stalwarts of faith, beginning from Abraham to what you name it. And you know, in that hall, Samson is there. Can you believe it? Samson is not a poster boy in my house. I don't tell my kid, be like Samson. I don't think you will tell your kid, be like Samson, isn't it? But Samson finds his name in that hall of faith. Look at all of the people who have been named in Hebrews. Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, you name it, David and Moses. Folks, Abraham and Isaac could not even take care of their own spouses when they got pregnant. Is that right? Look at David and Moses. Moses killed an Egyptian and ran into Egypt, ran out of and went to the land of Midian. And God meets him, is that right? Look at David, was a conniver, was a guy who plotted the death of his Uriah so that he can have the chamber. When God picks people, God doesn't pick neat and good people. God picks the most ordinary, broken, and humble people. Samson finds his place in the hall of faith. God will not let you be in your places of brokenness. God will never say to you and to me, you have willfully disobeyed me and I can have nothing to do with you. Don't take that permission. Don't think because God is with you that you can do whatever you want. God will give you chances after chances. But when you come to those places of desperation and we look to God, guess what? The God who came to Samson will come to you. Amen.
Amen.
Close your eyes with me as we. God, I give you thanks this morning. Thank you for the life of Samson, oh God. But most importantly, I thank you that the way you say that you are a faithful God, that your steadfast love endures forever. You say that over and over again to the psalmist, my steadfast love will endure forever. My steadfast love endures forever. And you showed that to the life of Samson, oh God. And I pray this morning, even in the scripture that we read, even the closing hymn that we will sing, just an amazing reminder, oh God, you did not come to Peter when he just was confessing you. You came to Peter on the shore when he was running away from you and he did not want to look at you because the last thing that he wanted to look at you was you. Because he had denied you. And not even before, when you picked your own disciples, you walked on the seashore and you looked at everyone not because they had the skill, but because they were just good enough for your kingdom. And for all of us who are in this place, oh God, we have been called by you. Not because we have the gifts, not because we will totally obey you, but because sometimes we will disobey you, but yet your Spirit will not leave us. That it will redeem us again and again. And to that, God, we commit each one of you. And we bless you in God's name. Go with that assurance that the one who called you is faithful and will be with you. We thank you, O God, for that promise. Bless us we bring our tithes and offerings to you. Bless us as we close this worship and as I send your people into this world, O God. May they continue to bear witness to the amazing things that you are doing in the lives of each one of us. We thank you and we bless you. In Christ's name we pray.
Amen.
And all of God's people say,
Amen.